The alien city was burning. Towers that once reached the sky were broken in half, spilling fire and smoke into the dark air. Streets were covered with stone and metal, and the sound of explosions still echoed in the distance. What had once been a proud capital now looked like a graveyard of broken dreams. Ethan, a human soldier, moved carefully through the ruins. His armor was scratched, and his helmet had cracks across the visor. He was alone. His squad had been scattered when enemy drones attacked from above. He had no way to call for help, and his communicator had been damaged. But Ethan kept moving forward, because stopping meant death. His boots crunched on broken glass as he entered what had once been a wide plaza. Statues lay in pieces. Alien writing glowed faintly on cracked stone walls. The silence was heavy, almost too heavy. Then through the silence he heard something, a faint sound. A cry. Ethan froze and turned his head. The cry came again, soft, weak, like a child calling out from somewhere deep under the rubble. His instincts told him to move on. This was not his war. He was not here to save strangers. But his heart refused. He could not walk away from that sound. He ran toward the fallen building and dropped to his knees. Large stone blocks had collapsed, sealing off what looked like an underground passage. The cry came again, clearer now. A child was trapped beneath the rubble. "Hold on," Ethan whispered, though he knew the child could not understand his words. He threw his rifle to the side and began pulling at the stone with his bare hands. His muscles burned and the sharp edges cut his gloves, but he did not stop. One by one he removed the heavy pieces, opening a small gap. A flash of glowing blue eyes appeared in the darkness. A little girl, no older than 6 by human measure, stared at him with fear and hope mixed in her gaze. Her skin shimmered faintly, almost like silver touched by moonlight. Her small arms reached out toward him. "It's okay," Ethan said softly, even though he knew she could not understand. He kept working until the hole was big enough. He reached in, pulled her close, and lifted her out of the rubble. She was light, almost too light, as if she had not eaten in days. She clung to his armor with trembling hands. Her breathing was quick, and her clothes were torn, but she was alive. Ethan looked at her face and felt something shift inside him. He had seen civilians before, but this was different. This child was alone, frightened and completely helpless in the middle of war. He knew at that moment he would not leave her behind. The sky rumbled. Distant engines echoed above. Enemy drones were circling back. Ethan grabbed his rifle, balanced the child in his arms, and hurried into the shadows of the ruined streets. The girl whispered something in her language, words that sounded musical yet broken by fear. Ethan shook his head. "I don't understand, kid. But don't worry. I've got you." He found a half-collapsed building and slipped inside. It smelled of smoke and dust. Ethan set the child down for a moment and checked his equipment. His ammo was low, his communicator dead, and his water pack nearly empty. The girl crawled closer to him and placed a small hand on his arm. Her glowing eyes looked at him as if she trusted him completely. Ethan gave her a small smile. "You're safe now," he whispered. Outside, the sound of drones grew louder. Ethan pulled the girl close and pressed his back against the wall. Red lights swept across the ruins as machines searched for survivors. One passed right over their hiding spot, but Ethan held still, hardly breathing. The girl buried her face against his chest, too scared to move. When the danger passed, Ethan exhaled slowly. His heart was still racing. They spent the night in the ruined shelter. Ethan tore part of his sleeve to make a blanket for the child. She fell asleep curled against him, her breathing finally steady. Ethan stayed awake watching the broken city through the cracks in the wall. He thought of home, of Earth far away, and wondered how he had ended up in this war. He had joined to serve, to protect his people, but now here he was, alone in a city that hated humans, holding a child who wasn't even his. But when he looked down at her sleeping face, he felt no regret. She trusted him. She needed him. That was enough. At dawn, the child woke and tugged at his armor. She pointed toward the far end of the city. Ethan followed her gesture and saw the distant outline of a tall, shining tower, still standing among the ruins. It looked untouched, almost sacred. "Is that where you want to go?" Ethan asked. She nodded, though he doubted she understood his words. He sighed, adjusted his rifle, and lifted her onto his back. "All right then. Let's get you home." The journey ahead would be dangerous. Enemy patrols still hunted the streets, and he had no allies. But Ethan's steps were steady. For the first time since the battle began, he had a purpose greater than survival. What he didn't know was that the child he carried, the girl with glowing eyes, was not just any lost child. She was the daughter of the alien queen herself, the most important figure in the Empire. Her disappearance had shaken the people, and her return would change everything. The morning light cut through the smoke-filled sky as Ethan stepped out of the broken shelter, with the child on his back. The streets were quiet, but he knew it would not stay that way. Drones and patrols always returned. Every hour was dangerous. The girl held onto him tightly, her small hands gripping his armor as if letting go would mean losing safety. Ethan walked carefully, moving from shadow to shadow, keeping close to the ruined walls. His soldier's training guided his steps. At one point, the girl tugged his shoulder and pointed. He followed her gaze and saw a broken alley, half hidden by fallen metal beams. It looked narrow and unsafe, but something in her eyes told him she knew this path. Ethan trusted her and stepped inside. The alley led them to a series of underground tunnels, dimly lit by flickering lights. The air was damp, and the sound of dripping water echoed through the stone passages. Ethan kept his rifle ready while the girl walked beside him, her glowing eyes lighting the way like two tiny lanterns. As they moved deeper, Ethan noticed alien markings carved into the walls. They looked like royal seals, symbols of high status. He realized then that the child knew these passages well. She wasn't just lucky, she belonged here. For a moment, Ethan wondered who she really was. Why had her presence drawn so much danger? Why was she left alone in the rubble? The questions filled his mind, but he pushed them away. All that mattered was keeping her alive until she was safe. Hours passed. They stopped in a small chamber to rest. Ethan shared the last of his water with her, letting her sip from his flask. She smiled at him, her silver hair catching the dim light. "Lyra," she whispered softly, tapping her chest. Ethan blinked. It was the first word he understood. "Lyra, that's your name?" The girl nodded. She pointed at him, waiting. Ethan smiled faintly. "Ethan, Then she repeated, struggling but determined. Her small voice carried warmth. From that moment, they were no longer strangers. They had names. They had a bond, but danger was never far. As they reached another tunnel exit, Ethan heard the sound of metal footsteps. A squad of enemy soldiers marched across the ruins above. Their armor gleamed and their weapons glowed with energy. Ethan pulled Lyra close and pressed against the wall. The soldiers paused, scanning the area with sharp, glowing visors. One of them stopped directly above the tunnel entrance. Ethan held his breath. Lyra's hand gripped his tightly, her eyes wide with fear. The soldier's visor flickered, then turned away. The squad moved on, their footsteps fading into the distance. Ethan finally exhaled. That had been too close. They continued their journey, but word of a human carrying a child had already spread. In another part of the city, alien civilians whispered of the soldier who risked his life for a little girl. Some doubted the story. Others believed it, and their fear of humans began to change into curiosity. By the second night, Ethan and Lyra found shelter in a collapsed temple. The ceiling was half destroyed, but glowing crystals still lit the walls. It was quiet, almost peaceful. Ethan built a small fire using broken wood. Lyra sat close to him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. She reached for his hand, placing her tiny fingers over his calloused palm. "You, safe," she said slowly in broken human words. Ethan's chest tightened. She was trying to speak to him, to reassure him even though she was the one who needed safety. He smiled and nodded. Yeah, safe, but their safety would not last. The next morning, enemy scouts found the temple. Shouts rang out as armored soldiers rushed inside. Ethan grabbed Lyra and ran, weaving between broken pillars. Energy blasts struck the walls, sending sparks across the floor. He dove behind a column, set Lyra down, and returned fire. His rifle cracked loudly, striking one soldier and forcing the others to scatter. But his ammo was running low. "Stay down," Ethan shouted, though Lyra already crouched low, covering her head with her arms. Thinking quickly, Ethan noticed a narrow passage near the back of the temple. He laid down, covering fire, then scooped Lyra into his arms and dashed toward it. Enemy shots burned the ground at his heels, but he pushed forward. They burst through the passage and escaped into another maze of ruins. When they finally stopped, Ethan leaned against a wall, out of breath. His rifle was nearly empty, but they were alive. Lyra touched his chest gently as if to calm him. "You strong?" she said softly. Ethan gave a tired laugh. "Not strong enough, kid. Just lucky." But it was more than luck. It was his training, his will, and the strange bond forming between them. That night, as they hid once again, Ethan realized something important. Lyra wasn't just surviving, she was guiding him. She seemed to know where to go, leading him closer and closer to the tall tower she had pointed out earlier. Ethan began to understand the truth. This wasn't just a scared child lost in the city. She was someone important, someone the enemy desperately wanted, and he was the only one standing between her and danger. The thought weighed heavily on him. But when he looked at her small face, when he heard her soft breathing as she drifted to sleep against his side, he knew he could not fail. He whispered to himself, a promise carried on the smoke-filled air. "She's safe. I'll keep her safe." And with that vow, Ethan closed his eyes, preparing for the final leg of their journey, one that would take them directly into the heart of the alien queen's court. The final stretch of the journey began before sunrise. Ethan woke with stiff muscles, his back aching from days of carrying both his rifle and the small child who trusted him more than anyone else. Lyra stirred awake, her glowing eyes blinking in the dim light. She pointed once again toward the tall tower in the distance. Ethan nodded. "All right, Lyra. We'll make it there today." The city was still dangerous, but the closer they came to the tower, the more signs of order appeared. Patrols were stronger here. Not enemy raiders, but soldiers of the Empire. Ethan kept to the shadows, not knowing whether they would see him as a protector or an intruder. As they reached the outer wall of the tower, Lyra tugged at his arm and whispered something in her own language. She tapped her chest, then pointed at the tower with urgency. Ethan understood this was her home. He took a deep breath. If she truly belonged here, then the tower might hold safety, or it might hold suspicion and judgment. Either way, he had no choice. He had promised her safety, and that promise had carried them this far. The gates loomed ahead, guarded by tall alien soldiers in shining armor. Their weapons glowed faintly as they spotted Ethan approaching. In an instant, they surrounded him, their voices sharp and commanding. Ethan raised one hand, keeping his other arm protectively around Lyra. "I'm not here to fight," he said firmly. "The child, she belongs here." The guards barked at him in their language, their stances tense. Then Lyra slipped from Ethan's arms and rushed forward, calling out in a clear, trembling voice. "Mother!" The soldiers froze. The word echoed through the courtyard. For a moment, the air itself seemed to stop. Then the great doors of the tower opened. A tall figure stepped out, draped in robes of silver and deep blue. Her crown gleamed like starlight, and her eyes, shining with the same glow as Lyra's, were filled with sharp command. She was the alien queen, ruler of the Empire. At first, her gaze hardened when she saw Ethan. To her, he was just a human soldier, a stranger carrying her daughter. Her guards raised their weapons, waiting for her command. But everything changed when Lyra ran to her and wrapped small arms around her waist. The queen gasped, dropping to her knees. She held her daughter tightly, pressing her face into the child's hair. Tears rolled down her cheeks, breaking her proud and unshakable image. "My child," she whispered in her own tongue, her voice trembling with relief. "You're alive." The guards lowered their weapons, stunned. Whispers spread among them. Some had believed the princess lost forever, buried beneath the ruins. Yet here she was, alive, carried back by the very being they once feared, a human. Ethan stood silently, his chest heavy with exhaustion. His armor was cracked, his rifle nearly useless, his body weak from hunger and battle. Yet when he saw mother and child reunited, he felt the weight lift from his shoulders. He had done what he set out to do. The queen finally looked up at him. Her eyes were wet but sharp. She studied the human who had brought her daughter back from the ruins of war. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, in a clear voice, she spoke to her guards. Though Ethan could not understand her words, the tone carried power. The soldiers stepped back, lowering their weapons completely. The queen rose, still holding her daughter close, and walked toward Ethan. She stopped only a few steps away. "You," she said slowly, her accent heavy but her words clear in human speech. "You brought her back," Ethan nodded. "She needed someone, I just couldn't leave her." The queen's lips trembled. "You risked your life for her, for me, for my people." Ethan shook his head. I didn't do it for politics. I did it because she's a child. No child should suffer like that. Lyra wriggled free from her mother's arms and ran back to Ethan. She hugged his leg tightly, smiling up at him. Safe, she said proudly, repeating the word he had taught her. The Queen's eyes softened. She saw the bond between them. Stronger than fear, stronger than differences. She reached out and placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. Human, she said gently, you are no enemy. You are a hero. The crowd of guards and attendants bowed their heads, murmuring in agreement. Word spread quickly through the city. The human soldier had saved the Queen's child. For the first time since the war began, whispers of hope filled the air. Ethan stood there, unsure how to respond. He was just a soldier who had stumbled into a ruined city. He had no plan, no thought of honor or recognition. He only knew that he had kept his promise. She's safe, he whispered, looking down at Lyra. The Queen heard him and smiled through her tears. Yes, she said softly. She is safe. Because of you, Ethan bowed his head. His mission was complete. He could finally rest. But deep inside, he knew this moment was more than just a reunion. It was the beginning of something greater. A bridge had been built between human and alien, formed not by treaties or weapons, but by the simple courage of protecting a child.